If you're living in St. Mary's County and you've ever had somebody do something wrong to you, you might have come across my friend here, Amy Lorenzini. Today, we're going to be talking with Amy about herself because you're running for judge here in St. Mary's County. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. So just to kind of get things started, I'm just a regular, ordinary guy. I know next to nothing about politics and even less about law. So with that being said, I feel like I'm in a position of the everyday guy, just trying to know you, understand the process of what it's like to elect a judge. I don't even know what criteria you use to elect a judge. How should we judging you, the judge, in this position? And then in general, I've asked my followers to send me some questions about what they want to know from you. So I'm excited about this just to learn about you personally and then have some of the folks fire some of the questions vicariously through me to you. So
great. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. So just to get things started, who are you? Tell me a little bit more about yourself.
So I am current sitting circuit court judge here in St. Mary's County. I was appointed by Governor Hogan in 2022 after a lengthy vetting process. All judicial positions in the state of Maryland begin with a gubernatorial appointment. And in order for the governor to have an opportunity to appoint someone, the first thing that needs to happen is an opening needs to occur. And that generally occurs because a judge retires, they reach the mandatory retirement age of 70, or a new position is created for a judgeship in the state. So a judge at any level, whether it's the district court, circuit court, or either of our appellate courts, is first appointed by the governor. That position's always filled first by the governor. And that occurred in 2021. Judge David Densford reached the age of 70 and was required to retire as a full-time judge. Created an opening here in St. Mary's County, and several people applied for that job. What happens when somebody applies is that a multiple-page application is put in. It's over 20 pages long. You fill out all kinds of information about your background, your family, your experience. You're required to provide writing samples. You are required to get recommendations, and you basically put all of that information together. That information is then disseminated to about 9 or 10 different interest groups and bar associations in the state of Maryland, and also to the governor. So that application was completed and submitted, and you then go through an interviewing process with those 9 or 10 organizations throughout the state of Maryland, including the Maryland State Bar Association, the Women's Law Center, the Maryland Association of Justice, the Franklin Bourne Bar Association, the Monumental Bar Association, the Maryland Defense Association. There's several of them.
Sounds like a big role.
It is. So your application goes to all of those different organizations, and you conduct interviews with all of them. They interview all of the candidates for a judicial position, and then they make recommendations to a local nominating commission. That local nominating commission here in St. Mary's County, we share one with Calvert County. So there are members of the nominating commission that are appointed by the governor. Some are nominated and recommended by the local bar association. Some are just appointed by the governor. Some are lay people in the community that have an interest in the nominating process. So once you've interviewed with all 9 or 10 of these different groups, they submit a recommendation to the local nominating commission. They submit a recommendation to the governor. You then go before the nominating commission along with all other applicants, and the nominating commission then makes the decision to send a list of names to the governor. They usually try to narrow it down to about 3 names that they send up to the governor. 13 different people make up the local nominating commission. Sometimes all 13 are there for interviews. Sometimes they're not. Not all 13 were there for our interviews, but a majority of the members were. They interviewed all 6 candidates, and they sent up 3 names to Governor Hogan. My name was one of them. It turns out that I was the only applicant at that point in time that had been deemed to be highly qualified or qualified by all of the groups that we interviewed with in the state of Maryland before that. They don't tell you that until you show up before the nominating commission.
Sure. They don't want to get you a chip on your shoulder or anything like that.
You never know how you're doing. You could be doing well, you could be doing poorly. You show up at the nominating commission and they said, how do you think you did? Who knows? I have no idea. The only one that sends you a letter back is the Maryland State Bar Association. So I knew that they'd said that I was highly qualified for the job, which was an honor, but I had no idea how I'd fared with the rest of the group. So it was very nice to hear that out of all of the applicants, I was the only one that was deemed to be highly qualified or qualified by those groups. It didn't mean that there was any particular outcome that could be completely disregarded by the nominating commission or the governor, but that was nice to hear. And so then you go and you interview with the governor, and they've done their very thorough background check. They had a binder that was relatively thick that they'd done through their vetting process, photographs, family information. You interview with the governor and the head of his legal counsel. And then ultimately in May of 2022, I received the phone call from Governor Hogan that he was appointing me to the bench, which was quite an honor and very appreciated. I remember being a bit speechless in that phone call and telling him that I would make him proud. And that was all I could really get out at the moment. They ask that you then get your practice wrapped up and get sworn in within about 30 days, which after being in private practice for 17 years and having hundreds of clients, it wasn't easy to do.
Yeah, but you had some hard phone calls to make.
I did. Fortunately, I think I found all of my clients, either other associates at the firm I was with or other attorneys in the area, to take their cases over and tried to transition everyone as peacefully and as happy as I could within that 30 days and wrap up my interest in my partnership and get sworn in. And I got sworn in on June 10th of 2022 in our circuit court. So that's kind of how I got here.
Basically, you go through a very lengthy vetting process. You get recommended by like 9 different board associations, what have you, a bunch of different folks. You go to the governor. Larry Hogan says, yep, I think that you're a good fit for the job. So now you were like the interim judge, so to speak, for the county since 2022. So you've been doing the work of a judge now for like 6 months, 7 months, something like that?
20 months now, because it was 2022. We're now into 2024.
2024? Oh my, I'm still living in 2023.
By the time the election comes around, I will be less than 30 days short of 2 full years by the time the primary comes around in May.
Okay.
By the time the general comes around in November, it will almost be 2.5 years. I will have been sitting on the bench here in St. Mary's County.
Understood. So now basically you're running to keep the job that you've had for the last almost 2 years.
Correct.
So let's sort of like rewind just a little bit and find out, who was Amy when she was in high school? You know, who was Amy when she was in college? You know, what are the things that basically shaped you to make you who you are right now?
Excellent question. I can tell you this, it wasn't a straight path. It was more of a zigzag path. My family and I moved to Southern Maryland in the mid 80s, and I went to public school in Charles County. I then went to University of Maryland, College Park. I started out my college career in engineering, believe it or not.
Like a lot of us, you know, that's what mom and dad says is good for us.
Right. I was an honors engineering student at the University of Maryland, which was known for their engineering program. I really thought I was going all the way with this engineering degree and engineering career. And a couple of years in, I realized that while engineering was great, it just wasn't a good fit for me. And so I changed my major. I changed my major to criminology and criminal justice because I could only afford to put myself through 2 more years of school, and I'd taken some electives in those areas. And so I could finish up my degree in those 2 years. And going into my senior year of college, I got a phone call that said, hey, we've started a new leadership academy, and someone with any major can participate in this leadership academy. You get a full semester's worth of credit for interning somewhere, and you can get a new experience. And I thought, oh, that's perfect, because I really didn't know what I was going to do at this point in time. Sure. And so I called and I said, great, I'm in. What do I need to do? And they said, oh, you just need to get an internship somewhere on Capitol Hill with a congressman, a senator, or somewhere in the White House, essentially. So I said, great, how do I do that?
Yeah. Make some phone calls for me, make some introductions.
Right. So thankfully, the person who was running the Leadership Academy had a friend who was working for a congressman, and he's a Collier local congressman. And so I did. I called Congressman Hoyer's office and set up an interview with them. I went to DC, bought my first suit, my first pair of heels, which turned out to be a disaster because you learn you don't want to wear heels in DC to get to a job somewhere in one of the House office buildings.
There's a lot of cracks in this.
Well, your feet generally hurt by the time you're getting there. But I went and I interviewed with the 2 different congressmen on the same day. One called me back that same day, offered me the internship, and since I needed it, I took it and I went with it. I had no background in politics. I really didn't know who anyone was. I didn't know anything about the legislature or how things worked, and I just took the opportunity and ran with it. And it was there where I met people that were going to go to law school, and they were taking law school prep classes, and they were talking about, using law school to further their careers in a lot of different areas. And so I thought, oh, well, this sounds really interesting, and it seems like it could be a very good fit. So I went and I took the LSATs and I went to law school. I went to the University of Maryland School of Law and lived in Baltimore and went to school and graduated from law school and took an internship here in St. Mary's County, a clerkship with Marvin Cammons, and came back to Southern Maryland.
What at that time of your life intrigued you about doing law when you had already several years under your belt doing engineering?
Right. Math and science to law, completely different backgrounds. I found it very interesting because the LSATs were very logical in nature, and I think that kind of related to my side of science and engineering and math pretty well. But I enjoyed people. I enjoyed advocating for others. I enjoyed the thought that I could give back in that role as an attorney and help others out. And so that was very appealing to me at that point in time. And that's really how that segue came about.
Okay, cool. So you take the LSATs, you get into law school. Where'd you end up going?
University of Maryland School of Law, downtown Baltimore.
So you do 3 years at University of Maryland, and then do you end up practicing law down here in Southern Maryland, or where do you go?
So I was looking for a clerkship out of law school, which is normal for a lot of law school graduates. They go and they clerk for a judge for a year to get more experience under their belt and to learn more about our judicial system. And so I was living back in Southern Maryland at the time, and I interviewed in Charles County, Calvert County, and St. Mary's County. And I got a phone call from Judge Kamenetz's office here in St. Mary's County saying, hey, Judge Kamenetz would like to offer you a clerkship. He also went to the University of Maryland undergrad. He also went to the University of Maryland School of Law, likes to hire, alums from his same school. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. That's great. That's wonderful. And it turned out to be one of the most amazing decisions of my life. Judge Kamenetz was an incredible individual. And everything that he touched as a judge, he got me involved in. So he got me involved in the teen court. He got me involved with the juvenile drug court. He got me involved with changes to some of our juvenile detention facilities at the time. And he just took me with him, got me involved. And then I ended up on the board of a lot of those different organizations as well because I'd had that experience. It was kind of the springboard to everything else. I left my clerkship with him and I went over to the state's attorney's office here in St. Mary's County. I started in the child support division of the state's attorney's office. But I was young and eager, and maybe it was because I was at the bottom of the totem pole, but when a position opened in district court, we all kind of took time divvying up the district court docket, and I got an opportunity to go to district court and work on traffic cases, small criminal cases, misdemeanor matters in district court a couple days a week. From there, I started handling some jury trial prayers in the circuit court, and I was sitting second chair on felony cases by the time I went to private practice. I went into a private practice here in Southern Maryland after that for the next 17 years.
Okay, very cool. And so just kind of, I'm sure that in private practice, you're probably going to cover a lot of different cases, a lot of different types of law, but did you focus more so on like family law, or did you continue working on like felonies or juvenile issues?
My practice area really morphed over the years. When I first went into private practice, I started doing family law matters and criminal law. I did a lot of district court and a lot of circuit court felony matters as a defense attorney at that point in time. And then I kind of started developing a niche in the complex civil areas of law, things like property rights, contracts, businesses that might be dissolving and breaking up, other fiduciary matters, civil jury trial experience. The last 7 years in private practice, I did a lot of that circuit court civil work. I did a lot of appellate work. I handled pieces of cases that were in our federal district courts and our federal bankruptcy courts that related to local contract and business cases. So it really morphed over time. As far as my legal experience was concerned, I always continued doing some amount of family law, criminal law, guardianships, adoptions, but it eventually morphed into a mostly civil trial experience.
Okay. So some of these terms that you're using are kind of going over the top of my head, but what I'm kind of gathering from what you're saying is that for the most part, you're working on what I would call colloquially like corporate law?
No, I can't say it was corporate law. So in Maryland, we have 4 different levels of court. We have the district court, the circuit court, our first appellate court, which is now called the Appellate Court of Maryland, and our highest appeals court, which is now called the Supreme Court of Maryland. The names were changed a couple of years ago. The district court in Maryland handles traffic matters. So you wouldn't necessarily see me for a speeding ticket. That would be district court. They handle our drinking and driving cases, go directly to district court. Our misdemeanor cases, some felony cases start in the district court and then work their way up to the circuit court. They also handle small claims matters and all landlord tenants matters, peace orders and protective orders in district court.
Okay, so basically from what I'm gathering is you were doing lots of different types of cases, but primarily
circuit court litigation.
Circuit court litigation.
Right. So if it involved, circuit court's the only level of courts that handles jury trials in the state of Maryland. And there are a lot of steps that go into a jury trial. There's motions to dismiss, motions for summary judgment, other evidentiary motions. and then the ultimate trial, whether it's a trial before a judge or a jury in the case. And that is what I focused the majority of my career on in the last 7 to 10 years of my private practice. I continued to do the criminal jury trial work and criminal work, but did a lot in the civil arena in the circuit court.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my phone now and dive into some of the questions that folks have asked. Some have asked some dingers. So
I will do my best. I will answer what I can.
So a judge is supposed to be impartial before the law, but as fellow human beings, we know that political and moral beliefs absolutely enter into how the law is interpreted and applied. What are the moral and what are the political beliefs that influence your rulings?
I can't say there's any necessary moral or political beliefs that influence my rulings. I mean, certainly we all come with our own set of experiences in life and our own kind of common sense as we take the bench. We all have biases, both known and implicit biases. Implicit biases is something we talk a lot about in the judiciary. We get a lot of training on how to be aware that that may be affecting a ruling and how to make sure that if we become aware of the fact that that may be influencing our thought process, to stop, take a moment, and either figure out if we can work with that and not let that influence the ultimate outcome of the case, remain fair, impartial, unbiased. And if we realize that those implicit or external biases are going to affect our ability to do that, then we stop and we recuse ourselves from the case and ask somebody else to take it. It's important. I mean, I think that question goes to the basic tenets of our justice system, is that we need to be making sure that we give people an opportunity to be heard, that we listen carefully, and that we make decisions that are unbiased, that are fair, and that are impartial. And if we are going to be influenced by something that's going to affect our ability to do that accurately, then we've got to step back and make a different decision.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I want to dive into that just a little bit further, because I think probably anybody who's running for judge wants to kind of communicate to everybody that, hey, I am going to be impartial. I am going to set my personal biases and my personal beliefs, for the most part, aside when trying to interpret and apply the law. But have you ever had a situation in which you did feel like you had a bias or some kind of impartiality towards a case, and have you ever recused yourself from a case?
So in the courthouse, generally what happens is when a case is filed, at the very beginning of it, we get requests that go around to all of the judges to take a look at the case, make sure that we don't know any of the parties that are involved, make sure that there isn't an improper relationship with any of the attorneys that are involved, make sure that we don't have a conflict with the subject matter that's involved. And we get that at the very forefront of a case. Now, granted, there are things that could happen along the process of the case where something will become known that wasn't known at the beginning of it. But generally, if there's a case that comes into my queue, which is our way of saying our inbox, essentially, and I notice that I have some personal knowledge of one of the parties that are involved such that it would create a conflict under the law, or say it's a member of my old firm that's involved in it, something like that. From the get-go, I explain that I have a conflict and I can't handle the case. So because we take those precautions at the very beginning, that helps put layer one into place. Hopefully that means that we don't have a conflict with the case that comes before us. The next step from my perspective is I'm a very prepared individual. I like to do my research. I like to read all of the pleadings. I like to come to the bench knowing what people have pled, what people have filed, and a basic understanding of what the law is that is going to apply to their case. So I do a lot of groundwork up front. In that process, if I notice something about a case that is going to be problematic for me, then I would, before even taking the bench and before even getting into the case, I would go see another judge and say, look, I think that this case might be a problem. I haven't had that come up yet, but I do that prep work, and I am prepared to ask. And thankfully, we have 3 circuit court judges here in St. Mary's County, and I think we're all willing to help each other out if that comes up. I mean, I've had other judges come to me at the last minute and say, hey, these parties showed up in my courtroom. It was a corporation. I didn't realize who the members of the corporation were, and it turns out I have a conflict. I have personal knowledge, a friendship with one of the parties. Can you take the case? And absolutely, we always step in. We want to keep justice moving. We want to keep that moving through the system as efficiently as possible. So we help each other out in that respect. I haven't yet had that happen. My office was in Calvert County, but I think that because a lot of my practice in the past and a lot of my clients might have been not necessarily from St. Mary's. I did a lot of work in St. Mary's County, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I have those conflicts that someone else may. I don't have as many conflicts as someone may have. I haven't had it come up yet. Now, certainly if I were in the middle of a court situation and I noticed that something came up, the first thing I'd do is tell everyone, tell the parties, tell the attorneys that there's an issue that's come to my attention. Let me know if you would like me to recuse myself. I make a record of it if it were to come up, and then, if necessary, stop the case.
Awesome. Great answer. And thank you for addressing that. I'm sure the person who asked that will be happy to hear. Okay, so what is your plan on keeping the repeated offenders in jail instead of letting them go for them to do the crime again and not be so leaning on house arrest with the ones that are having a more serious charge?
To address your question, I think it goes to sentencing, what my sentencing theories are, what my thoughts on sentencing are, and specifically it sounds like sentencing of repeat offenders. And I would say a couple things. One is I never make up my mind about a sentencing until I've had an opportunity to hear from everyone in the case. That goes back to the impartial, unbiased part of this, is you need to give everyone a chance to explain what it is they're requesting with regards to sentencing. I listen to the state's attorney's request, I listen to the defense attorney's request, and then ultimately I listen to the defendant themselves and what it is that they want to tell me in their own behalf and in mitigation of their own sentence. It's then up to me as the judge to decide what sentence is fair and appropriate in that given circumstance. One of the things in the circuit court that we look at a lot are guidelines. There is a form that we're required to fill out in these cases and submit them to the administrative office of the courts, or the Maryland, they're called MAGs. I'm sure you're probably not interested in that. But you are required to submit this to the state of Maryland, kind of keep track of the sentences that are being given throughout the state. And that guideline allows for points to be given. And one of the scores that's given is an offender score. And that offender score is based on whether or not somebody was engaged with the criminal justice system at the time that this crime occurred, that this charge was incurred. They give points how extensive of a background, if someone has a minor, a moderate, or a major criminal background. And there are points that are assessed. For repeat offenders, if they've had that contact with the court system, they're going to have a higher offender score. That score is taken along with an offense score. Each type of offense is scored. If there's a victim, there's points given. If there's a victim that has special vulnerability, there's points given. And they then combine those scores. They take it to a table, and there's a recommended sentencing guideline, a minimum that the state would recommend, a maximum that the state would recommend. I'm not bound by those sentencing guidelines. I can sentence someone more time than those sentencing guidelines, and I've done that a number of times. But it gives us an idea of where someone would fall if they fell in any jurisdiction in the state and had committed the same crime.
So I'm really glad that you kind of brought that up, because I think that's probably what this guy is asking about, is when you have like a maximum recommended sentence and maybe like a minimum recommended sentence, do you find yourself typically leaning towards like the maximum, or do you feel like you're typically moving? You know, if you were to like say a percentage of your...
I can't even say a percentage. It is all dependent on the case itself, the charges that are pending, the individual that's before the court. And I've had a number of sentences that have been over guidelines, a lot of sentences within the guidelines, and some sentencings that were below the guidelines for their own extraordinary reasons, usually. It is case dependent, and it's made up after hearing everyone in the case, after hearing the facts of that particular crime. I don't know if this is a question that's going to come up, but I would say this much. My family and I have lived here in St. Mary's County since 2009. My children have gone to school here. I still have a child in our public school system. So public safety is a concern for all of us. It's a concern for me, but that's only one of the prongs that's taken into consideration. Punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation, all things that I consider at the time that I come up with a sentence. And I try to be as fair and impartial as I can when making that decision.
Question asked, what is your thought on second chances for individuals in terms of setting people back up on the right path of life?
Good question. I'm not exactly sure what it's getting into. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about diversion programs and maybe second chances that are given through some diversion programs. I know just recently my opponent put out some initiatives with regards to diversion programs. The problem with answering that question, though, is a lot of those questions, a lot of those diversion or second chance programs mean that someone's being kind of diverted away from the legal system, and I don't end up seeing them in the long run. It doesn't really end up being a legal decision at that point in time. It is meant to be a program that is kind of put into place in order to maybe give somebody an alternative prior to coming into the court system. So by the time I see someone's generally been through a number of processes or given opportunities. So from a judicial standpoint, again, whether or not there are cases where second chances may be very appropriate, there are cases where second chances may not be appropriate.
Could you give an instance in which you thought a second chance wasn't appropriate?
There's no formula to this, right? I can't say that when someone comes before me for sentencing, if you've done something previously or you have a prior crime that you've committed, that I'm going to do anything that's of any formula. I make every decision based on an impartial and unbiased decision in that particular case for that particular individual based on those particular facts and applying the law to that set of facts in that situation. I can tell you that in some cases I've had in the past, if somebody's already on parole or probation at the time that they've committed another crime and we're at the point where it's sentencing, so it's not as though it's just that there's an allegation, there is either a guilty finding or a guilty plea, I do tend to give weight to the fact that they were on parole or probation at the time that this new infraction occurred. But again, that's several steps into the process, and there's already been an admission to or a guilty finding on a new crime when there was already a probation or parole that was outstanding.
This is another question from a follower. Ask both Amy and Sue and this if you can. When a child commits a minor crime, what would be their approach to helping that child, or what resources would be used instead?
So juvenile justice, right, is a pretty hot topic right now. We've had a lot of changes in the legislature. And that question goes a little bit to legislative decisions and what the legislature has decided. Again, we kind of talked about this with second chances just now. I mean, by the time a court gets to see a juvenile case, generally they've been through several steps of the process. When a juvenile gets involved with the system, whether it's because the police have responded to something or there's been a report to the sheriff's office, they then talk with the Department of Juvenile Services, they talk to the local state's attorney, and there's an opportunity for them to have an informal outcome of that case through the Department of Juvenile Services that the court will never see. It never comes before a court. It never is before a judge. So that is in existence. That is already there. It's been in place as part of our juvenile justice system for a long time. By the time a case gets before the court, a decision's been made between the sheriff's office and the Department of Juvenile Services and our state's attorney's office that it's an appropriate case to present to a court for whatever reason that is. And then we have a judge that is sitting over at our circuit court that's dedicated to those juvenile cases. It's currently Judge Stamm. All the juvenile cases go before him. Generally, what I've been seeing as a sitting judge are cases where a juvenile's been charged as an adult, and either they're not eligible for waiver back to the juvenile court, or there is a request to waive them back to juvenile court, in which case there is a series of factors that I have to take into consideration as to how to handle those particular cases. But I think what that individual may have been asking may be something that's part of the juvenile justice system and the functions that happen before a case gets to a court and before a judge.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So this one probably is going to be like similar to the other two, where it may not be your call, basically, or it may be leaning towards the personal beliefs. But do you think it's right for children to be forced to be vaccinated in order to go to public schools?
I hate to seem like I'm avoiding questions because I don't, that's not my intention. I believe in transparency in the judicial system. I'm always more than happy to talk to people about procedure and why it is that the courts are set up the way they are and what it is that we have the power to do and not have the power to do. That is something that is completely outside of my power and is one of our judicial ethics that I'm required to live by, is that I have to not only maintain that sense of impartiality and unbiasedness while I'm in court, but I'm required to do it on my personal time as well. So I think answering that would be a violation. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be avoiding the questions. I'm just trying to make sure that I maintain the judicial ethics that I swore I would uphold. For sure. So thank you.
Another question is, what are some of the crimes that bother you the most?
In the circuit court, I see the run of crimes, right? People have a right to request a jury trial if there is the possibility of incarceration of 90 days or more. So they can ask, even if it's a misdemeanor case, they can ask for it to come to the circuit court for trial. I see major felony cases that run the gambit from drug distribution to burglary and carjacking to homicide cases. They all have a personal aspect to them that it's a crime, right? We've said as a community, the legislature has said we're making these crimes. And so I see the gambit of them as a circuit court judge. almost an unfair question to ask if there's one that is worse than another. They're crimes. My job as a judge is to, if it's a jury trial, then my job is to rule on issues of law that may come up prior to, during the trial, and make a decision as to sentencing, ultimately in the long run. If it's a court trial, my job is to listen to the facts that are presented in the case, apply the law to the facts as I hear them. So being attentive, paying attention, understanding the law, and trying to do my best in applying that law to the facts is my job in each of these cases.
So just as a closing question, everybody wants to kind of present themselves in the absolute best light. But at the same time, every employer is going to ask this kind of question. So I'll ask it for you too. And that is, what do you think are your weaknesses, or what do you think are reasons that people wouldn't vote for you? And then on the flip side, why do you think people should vote for you?
I appreciate the question. I'm not a perfect person. I don't pretend to be a perfect person. Anyone that is on the bench comes with their own background, their own experiences in life, their own upbringing, and their own raising. I do my best as a judge to be aware of, like I said earlier, anything that may affect my ability to fairly hear a case, fairly listen to a case, and I evaluate it appropriately when it's time. I have the utmost ethics. As an attorney, I had incredible ethics as a judge. I am very prepared. I come to the bench ready to go. I come to the bench on time, and I prepared to hear the case and prepared to spend the time necessary to listen to a case. I want to move cases through the system efficiently. I try to make the right decisions. If there's a weakness, it might be that I want to make the right decision. And there are times where I may need a few more moments at the end of a case, now that I've heard the facts and the way they've come out, to make a decision. I get decisions made quickly and fairly, even if I take something under advisement, but I make sure that I give a case its appropriate value and make sure that if I need more time, I take it. Now, that being said, we like to move cases through the system efficiently. There are times where justice delayed can be justice denied. I'm well aware of that. I try to stay on top of things and keep things moving. I think that goes back into why people should vote for me. One, I have a proven track record as an experienced judge. I encourage people to become informed and to vote informed, and to ask people that may be involved in the court system that may have had cases in front of me, ask them how they feel like they were treated. I think that you're going to hear that people feel like I listened, and even if they didn't agree with my decision, that I was fair and did my job appropriately. I have extensive criminal and civil litigation and trial experience that I've used not only at the circuit court, but the appellate court level. So I understand the record that needs to be made at the circuit court level to protect my decisions, which I think is really important. If I'm going to spend the time and I'm going to listen and I'm going to make a decision, I want to make sure it's something that's going to be upheld in the long run. I have an extensive background in community service. I've worked very closely with a lot of different groups. I was a project manager with Christmas in April for 10 years and made sure that through that I had more than 10 houses. There were years we took on 2 houses that got the repairs they needed. I started and ran a family law clinic for self-represented litigants for a decade. I have been a volunteer through the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. I've received awards for my pro bono work. I recently received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Maryland State Bar Association and the Daily Record in their Leader in Law program. This is the second time I was the recipient of a Leadership in Law award, and this year I was a lifetime achievement. I do have not only a commitment to the law, legal ethics, and the community as a whole, but also to the legal community. I've taught at the Maryland Professionalism Center when it was in place. I have been the president of local bar associations. I was on the executive committee with the Maryland State Bar Association through COVID, dealing with some of the issues that you talked about earlier. And I've given back a tremendous amount to the legal community. I believe in our system. I believe that it works best when it works as a whole, and that if I'm going to sit as a judge, that I also need to be willing to be a part of the community and be a part of the solution. And I make that part of what I do every day. So I hope that people do their research and find that out and vote for me for those reasons.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate you sharing and sitting down with me and taking some of the pointed questions that are coming at you. I mean, some
okay.
of them a little hesitant to ask
I understand
myself,
them.
But, you know.
I mean, people have questions. I wish they were questions that I could answer. But again, in upholding those judicial ethics, I just have boundaries I can't cross. And I appreciate you being patient and aware of that.
100%. And for the folks that want to either hear more from you on a one-on-one basis, on a group setting, wherever you are either posting or making speeches or whatever you're doing to kind of like talk to folks about your campaign, where can they go?
They can go to my website, www.keepjudgeamy.com. They can go to my Facebook page, Judge Amy Lorenzini. They can go to my Instagram page. I'm learning about Instagram. That's getting a little bit more active, but that's also Judge Amy Lorenzini. And they can get information about me from all of those sources. Again, I also would encourage people to ask people they know that are involved in the system, and hopefully they'll get some good answers.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.